All of this was brought upon us in a single day, and night fell on a different world, a world where freedom itself is under attack.
Emma Hutchinson, in her article Trauma and the Politics of Emotions, denotes that trauma involves the experiencing of something so disturbing that one's understanding of the world and how it works is severely disrupted. This corresponds to the President's address and proclamation of the War on Terror made in the weeks after the 9/11 attacks on New York City and Washington. In the wake of the attacks, one of the most striking images from the morning of September 11th was of people on the sidewalks of New York clasping their hands over their mouths as a testament to what would soon be known as an unspeakable and unfathomable event. In his article, Filling the Void of Meaning, Dirk Neighbors resolves that crisis must be given meaning and a discourse must be adopted. Hutchinson finds meaning in median representations of trauma, as media makes crises a collective experience. For instance, the portrayal of the 9/11 attacks can show how singular events of trauma can be represented in ways that shift them from the realm of the individual to that of the collective. Hutchinson continues that key to how individual trauma becomes a collective phenomenon is representation. The effect of these traumas have great impact on the emotions of individuals and how societies make sense of catastrophes. In the aftermath of the attack, the Bush administration was able to utilize the media and representation to shape an identity for the United States. Because of this, the 9/11 attacks were constructed as a global tragedy and as a day without comparison. The world had lost meaning, and in the time after, identity itself would have to be rebuilt. Summation can be given through the words of scholar Jenny Edkins. She states, "This is why traumatic events are described as the moment the world changed. They shatter our previous worlds, built around carefully cultivated stories of durability and safety, and it's through the representations of these events that we collectively experience trauma. It is important to note that visual information, particularly negative imagery, captures the viewer's attention and interest, and is easier to understand than verbal information. Negative visuals, like those in terrorism stories, are likely to induce emotion since they evoke fear of death. It is my belief that film can be the most meaningful and insightful means of representing issues of international relations and trauma through the visual form." Robert Gregg, author of International Relations on Film, states, "Films are one of the most common and most powerful instruments for dispensing information about the world we live in." In his text, he offers that while film may be a poor substitution to reading, it can act as a powerful adjunct. It's emphasized that films act to enhance our knowledge of major issues of international relations as they dramatize the abstract idea in the mundane event. Movies make abstract ideas more concrete, and events can seem more real and vivid than if they were printed word. What's more, as Greg comments, movies typically dramatize by personalizing. The great concepts that have dominated the dialogue about international relations, concepts such as sovereignty, nationalism, balance of power, hegemony, and deterrence, are all abstractions and hence tend to be faceless and impersonal. Film, by its very nature, if it is to find an audience and hold its attention, must make such abstractions concrete. Films focus on individuals who become surrogates for groups, for armies, for governments, for nations. Ideas are personified. Since the advent of film, the medium has been used as a way to portray the trauma of real-world events and crises. In Wim Wenders' 1987 film, Wings of Desire, the city of Berlin is portrayed as one that was haunted by the memory of war and divided by the Cold War. A film like Steven Spielberg's Munich portrays the massacre of Israeli athletes at the 1972 Olympic Games and the subsequent revenge plot acted out by the Israeli government. Or there are a number of other films that investigate the trauma of World War II, including Terrence Malick's 1998 film, The Thin Red Line, but understanding visual language seems to have become more important in the post-9/11 era, particularly given the work done by the Bush administration to capture visual moments. This is especially true considering the post-9/11 generation of movies set on not only because of the attacks, but because of presidential advisor Karl Rove's visit to Hollywood and the chairman of the Motion Picture Association of America, Jack Valenti's subsequent pledge to the support for a so-called military-industrial media entertainment complex. As a result, movies have materialized that examine the circumstances of the September 11th attacks, or have acted as sympathetic portrayals of past and present military action. It should be noted that shortly after the attack, the release dates for Behind Enemy Lines and Black Hawk Down were moved forward, reflecting that militaristic displays of patriotism were once again timely and wanted. Hollywood began to search for a narrative similar to the one that surrounded American involvement in World War II, as the conventional wisdom is similar, in that everything had changed and nothing would be the same again. One such act that reflected Hollywood's concern for the trauma of the nation was the work done to eliminate shots of the World Trade Center from escapist blockbusters like Spider-Man, Serendipity, and Zoolander. In fact, this may attribute the significance placed on James Marsh's 2008 film Man on Wire, a documentary that celebrated the marvel of the World Trade Center. One critic notes, "The black and white photographs of Petit, a high-wire artist defying gravity in the course of his horizontal ascent, seem as unbelievable as the idea that one day the towers would no longer exist." Scholar J. Snyder attributes that significance to the trauma felt by the both captivating and devastating nature of seeing the footage of the towers coming down. Snyder would go on to state, "I will never be able to view my city's skyline on screen or in person the same way again." The significance of 9/11-based films will come from critic and viewer response. Like other movies based on sensitive issues, they will be judged based on their ability to convey facts and elicit emotions, while more thoughtful viewers will consider how earnest or responsible the films may be. I will be specifically investigating two films that came out after the attack. The first is Spike Lee's 2002 film 25th Hour, one of the first movies explicitly set in New York after 9/11. Robert Gregg impresses upon us that lessons will often be presented in a metaphorical fashion. And in the case of 25th Hour, 9/11 becomes an unspoken undercurrent of the film, whether it be presented through an apartment that overlooks the wreckage of 9/11 or through our protagonist's father, a former firefighter and bar owner, that allows the shadow of 9/11 to hang over him as his bar acts as a shrine to those lost. Lee was in pre-production of the film when the towers fell, and as a prominent New York filmmaker and auteur director, he followed his instinct to include the disaster as part of the movie. What's also important to note is the skyline has changed. A.O. Scott of the New York Times states, "This particular skyline is dominated by the twin columns of light that illuminated downtown as a tribute to those who died in the Twin Towers on September 11, 2001. Watching the beams fade into dawn on screen stirred up some half-buried sorrows, which I found a little jarring. The New York of the movies has always been exaggerated, even fantastical version of the real place, and this division has seemed especially acute in the past year. Even in new movies, the cinematic city has frequently offered a backward or sidelong escape from the post-9/11 real thing. For Scott, this is a case of reality overwhelming fiction. It is the film's undercurrents that highlight the trauma of the attacks. The film is plagued by the ambience of stunned grief as well as the feeling of guilt in those who have survived. The dissolved Scott Tobias notes, "The aftermath of 9/11 is of fleeting incidental concern to the day in the life of 25th Hour. But the tenor of life has shifted unmistakably, which is true of New York and of the country. Even unseen, it's a presence." In fact, 9/11 references make up a very small portion of the film. They are mostly assembled in the opening credits that assemble different views of the tribute of lights that were erected. Scott of the New York Times also notes that the ending monologue offers a bittersweet and sincere evocation of the American dream as I have ever seen on film in quite some time, acknowledging both the futility of the collective national fantasy and its consoling resilient power. On the other hand, the second film I will look at, United 93, is very much centered on the tragedy of 9/11. It focuses in real time on the United Airlines 93 flight that was targeting Washington, but crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania as a result of passenger revolt against the hijackers. Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times felt that the film was heartbreaking while also honoring the memory of the events and victims. For Ebert, United 93 is incomparably more powerful because it depicts all of its characters as people trapped in an inexorable progress towards tragedy. This is further emphasized by the film's early scenes that show men and women getting ready for another day at work and passengers getting ready for a flight. It acts as a reminder that before the events of that day, and before these individuals were deemed heroes, victims, or terrorists, that they were people, not abstractions. Ebert leaves us with this: to watch United 93 is to be confronted with the grim, chaotic reality of September 11, 2001. And also noting that when we see the planes crash into the World Trade Center, the air traffic controllers recoil in shock. In that moment, seemed as real as it did on September 11, 2001. I'll leave you with this. Hollywood has a long history of turning widespread fears into cinematic spectacle, but never before has the source of those fears been so singular, so easily isolated, or so thoroughly disseminated to international and national audiences.
Was a blood red circle on the cold dark ground.